When Sarah walked into that divorce attorney's office on a rainy Tuesday morning, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely sign her name. After 15 years of marriage, she was finally ready to admit the truth. The man she'd once called her soulmate had slowly, methodically destroyed every piece of who she used to be. But let me start from the beginning. Because Sarah's story isn't just about the ending, it's about how a confident, successful marketing executive became a shadow of herself and how she found her way back. It was 2008 when Sarah first met David at a charity gala in downtown Chicago. She was 32, running her own boutique marketing firm and feeling pretty good about life. David swept into that ballroom like he owned the place. Tall, charming, impeccably dressed. When he approached her at the bar, his opening line was smooth as silk. "You know," he said, flashing that $1,000,000 smile, "I've been watching you all night, and I can tell you're different from everyone else here." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. Different how? "You actually care about the cause we're here for. Most of these people are just here to see and be seen." His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. "I'm David Mitchell, by the way. I run Mitchell & Associates, downtown." The law firm. She'd heard of it. Big cases, bigger clients, even bigger reputation. She was impressed, and David could tell. That was his first victory. Their courtship was like something out of a romance novel. David showered her with attention, expensive dinners, weekend getaways to Napa Valley. He seemed genuinely fascinated by her work, her dreams, her thoughts on everything from politics to poetry. "You're so intelligent," he'd tell her over candlelit dinners. "Most women I meet are beautiful but empty. You're the whole package." Sarah had never experienced anything like it. Previous boyfriends had been nice enough, but David made her feel like the most important person in the world. When he proposed after just 8 months, standing on the shore of Lake Michigan with the ring that probably cost more than her car, she said yes without hesitation. The first red flag came during their engagement, but Sarah missed it completely. She was planning their wedding, excited to share ideas with David, when she mentioned wanting a small ceremony. Small? David's face changed in an instant. The warm smile vanished. "Sarah, this is going to be the social event of the year. My clients expect a certain standard. We can't have some backyard barbecue." "I just thought something intimate would be nice," Sarah said softly. "Look," David's voice took on that patient tone she'd later learned to dread. "I know you come from a different background, and that's fine, but you're marrying into my world now. Trust me on this." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach, but David was already pulling her close, kissing her forehead. "Hey, I'm sorry if I came on strong. I just want our day to be perfect, for both of us." And there it was, the cycle that would define the next 15 years of her life. Criticism disguised as guidance. Dismissal followed by affection. The message was always the same. David knew best, and Sarah should be grateful for his wisdom. But wait, the real shock was still coming. Their wedding was magnificent. 300 guests at the Four Seasons, a 7-course dinner, a 12-piece orchestra. Sarah felt like a princess, even though she recognized maybe 20 people in the crowd. Her friends seemed so out of place among David's colleagues and clients. "Where's your college roommate?" David asked during the planning. "Lisa, right?" "She's coming. She's my maid of honor, remember?" Right, the teacher." David's tone carried just a hint of condescension. "Well, maybe we should seat her at table 12 with your cousins from Milwaukee." Sarah felt that knot again. I was hoping she'd be at table 3 with us. Sweetheart, table 3 is for partners and senior associates. People who, well, you understand. Sarah didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. She was learning that questioning David's judgment was more trouble than it was worth. The honeymoon in Tuscany was perfect, and for the first year of marriage, Sarah convinced herself she was living a fairy tale. David was attentive, generous, and seemed genuinely proud to have her as his wife. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small criticisms. That dress is a little tight, don't you think? Or, maybe you should handle the wine selection. I know more about vintages. Then came the isolation. David had opinions about her friends. Lisa was negative and jealous. Her business partner Jenny was unprofessional. Her sister Kate was always causing drama. "I'm just looking out for you," David would say. "You're too trusting. You don't see how people use you." Sarah found herself making excuses to her friends, canceling girls' nights because David had planned something, declining invitations because David thought the people were beneath them. Gradually, her social circle shrank to almost nothing. But here's where it gets really twisted. David wasn't just isolating her socially, he was systematically undermining her confidence in every area of her life. Sarah had always been proud of her cooking, but David had feedback for every meal. "The chicken's a little dry tonight. Maybe you should stick to that recipe my mother gave you." She'd been passionate about interior decorating, but David dismissed her ideas. "I think we should hire a professional, someone with actual training." Even her work suffered. "Maybe you should consider scaling back," David suggested one evening. "The stress is showing. You seem tired lately." Sarah looked in the mirror that night and barely recognized herself. When had those lines appeared around her eyes? When had her shoulders started to slump? The gaslighting was subtle but constant. When Sarah would bring up things David had said or done, he'd look genuinely confused. "I never said that, honey. Are you sure you're remembering correctly? You seemed upset about the Johnson account, but I never criticized your work. I think you might be projecting." "Sarah, I'm worried about you. You're remembering conversations that never happened." Slowly, Sarah began to doubt her own memory, her own perceptions. Maybe she was being too sensitive. Maybe David was right to be concerned about her judgment. Now, here's the part that still makes my heart break for Sarah. The moment when she almost lost herself completely. It was their 10th anniversary. Sarah had planned a quiet dinner at home, recreating their first date. She'd spent all day cooking David's favorite meal, arranged flowers, even bought that expensive wine he liked. David came home late as usual. He looked around the dining room with its candles and flowers and sighed. "Sarah, what's all this?" "It's our anniversary. I wanted to do something special." "Anniversary." David loosened his tie, suddenly looking exhausted. "Right. Look, I've had a brutal day. Can we just order takeout and watch TV?" Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. "I spent all day preparing this." "And I appreciate that. I really do. But I told you I had the Morrison deposition tomorrow. This is kind of a lot right now." Sarah stared at the table she'd set with their wedding china, the meal she'd labored over, the wine she'd carefully chosen. "I didn't tell me about any deposition." David's expression changed, that familiar look of patient disappointment. "Sarah, we talked about this yesterday morning. You were distracted, probably thinking about one of your client meetings. This is exactly what I mean about your scattered attention lately." "I don't remember." "Of course you don't." David's voice carried that edge she'd learned to fear. "Look, I don't want to fight on our anniversary. Let's just order Chinese and call it a night, okay? Sarah nodded, but as she blew out the candles, she felt something dying inside her. She couldn't trust her own memory anymore. She couldn't trust her own judgment. She was completely dependent on David to tell her what was real. But sometimes life has a way of forcing us to wake up. It was Sarah's friend Jenny who finally opened her eyes. Jenny had been trying to reach out for months, leaving messages that Sarah rarely returned. But one day, Jenny showed up at Sarah's house unannounced. "Sarah, I'm worried about you," Jenny said, settling into the living room Sarah had decorated according to David's specifications. "When's the last time I seen you? You missed my birthday party, your sister's baby shower. What's going on?" Sarah felt that familiar anxiety rising. David wouldn't like her discussing their marriage with Jenny. "I've just been busy. David's practice is expanding and—" "Sarah," Jenny's voice was gentle, but "do you remember what you used to be like? Do you remember how confident you were? How you used to light up a room?" Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. "When's the last time you made a decision without asking David first? When's the last time you wore something because you liked it, not because David approved?" That night, alone in her bathroom, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror, really looked. The woman staring back was a stranger, thin, tired, wearing a designer dress David had chosen in colors David preferred, her hair styled the way David liked it, her makeup applied to David's standards. Where was Sarah? The breaking point came 3 weeks later at David's law firm's annual Christmas party. Sarah had carefully chosen a navy blue dress David had previously complimented, styled her hair the way David preferred, even practiced conversations about cases and clients she knew would impress his colleagues. She was standing by the bar, nursing a glass of wine and trying to look engaged in a conversation about maritime law, when she overheard David talking to his partner, Robert. "How's Sarah doing?" Robert asked. David glanced around, making sure Sarah couldn't hear, but she could. "Honestly, she's been struggling. Depression, I think, maybe anxiety. She's become so clingy, so insecure. I'm trying to be supportive, but it's exhausting." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "That's tough, man," Robert replied. "She seemed so put together when you first got married." "She was," David said, shaking his head sadly. "But success changes people. Her little marketing business got too big too fast, and she couldn't handle the pressure. I keep telling her she should sell it, focus on our marriage, but she's too stubborn to admit she's in over her head." Sarah set down her wine glass with shaken hands. Her successful business that David claimed to be proud of, her depression and anxiety that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere, her clinginess and insecurity that had developed as David systematically isolated her from everyone she cared about. For the first time in years, Sarah saw clearly. That night, she pretended to be asleep when David came to bed. But she was wide awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering who she used to be. The woman who built a successful business from nothing, who had close friendships and family relationships, who trusted her own judgment and stood up for herself. The woman David had spent 15 years convincing her she'd never been. The next morning, while David was at the gym, Sarah called Jenny. "I need help," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank God," Jenny breathed. "I've been waiting for this call for years." Jenny helped Sarah find a therapist who specialized in emotional abuse. Dr. Rachel Martinez was warm but direct, and she helped Sarah understand what had been happening to her. It's called narcissistic abuse, Dr. Martinez explained during their third session. Your husband didn't set out to destroy you consciously. Narcissists genuinely believe they're helping their partners become better versions of themselves. But what they're really doing is reshaping their partners to meet their own needs. Sarah learned about love bombing, the intense attention and affection David had showered on her early in their relationship, about gaslighting, the systematic undermining of her reality, about isolation, criticism, and the cycle of abuse and reconciliation that had defined her marriage. The hardest part, Dr. Martinez said gently, is that narcissists are often genuinely charming and successful. People who haven't lived with one can't understand how someone so accomplished and charismatic could be emotionally abusive. Sarah thought about David's colleagues, his clients, even her own family members who thought David was wonderful. How could she explain that the man who donated generously to charity and volunteered at legal aid clinics was slowly suffocating her at home? It took Sarah 6 months of therapy to build up the courage to confront her reality. 6 months of remembering who she was, of reconnecting with friends David had driven away, of rebuilding her confidence one small decision at a time. The morning she decided to leave was surprisingly ordinary. David was getting ready for work, complaining about a junior associate who had missed a deadline. Some people just can't handle responsibility. They need constant supervision, constant validation. It's exhausting dealing with that kind of weakness. Sarah looked up from her coffee. You're talking about me. David paused, meeting her eyes in the mirror. What? No, David, I'm being clear. Maybe for the first time in years. That evening, Sarah told David she was leaving. His reaction was everything Dr. Martinez had prepared her for. First, denial. You're having some kind of breakdown, Sarah. You're not thinking clearly. Then anger. After everything I've done for you, I made you who you are. Without me, you're nothing. Then bargaining. I'll change. We'll go to counseling. I'll cut back on work, spend more time at home. Finally, the threats. You'll never make it without me. You don't have the strength. You'll come crawling back within a month. But Sarah had learned something crucial in therapy. She didn't need to argue with David or convince him of anything. She just needed to leave. Which brings us back to that rainy Tuesday morning, 6 months later, Sarah sitting in the divorce attorney's office, signing papers with steady hands. The divorce was ugly. David fought for everything, the house, the business, even Sarah's grandmother's jewelry. He painted her as unstable, vindictive, a woman who couldn't handle the pressure of being married to a successful man. But Sarah had something she hadn't had in years, a support system. Jenny, who helped her move into a small apartment downtown, her sister Kate, who flew in from Denver to sit with her during depositions, Dr. Martinez, who helped her stay centered when David's manipulations threatened to drag her back into self-doubt. Most importantly, Sarah had herself back, the woman who could trust her own judgment, who could make decisions without fear, who could look in the mirror and recognize the face looking back at her. It was during the worst part of the divorce proceedings that Sarah met Dr. Emily Carter. Sarah's attorney had suggested she see a psychiatrist, someone who could evaluate her mental health and testify that she wasn't the unstable woman David claimed she was. Dr. Carter came highly recommended, known for her work with survivors of emotional abuse. Dr. Carter's office was warm and welcoming, nothing like the cold perfection of the home Sarah had shared with David. Books lined the walls, and soft afternoon light filtered through gauze curtains. Dr. Carter herself was in her 50s, with kind eyes and an air of calm competence. "Tell me about yourself, Sarah. Not about your marriage, not about the divorce. Tell me about you." It was such a simple question, but Sarah realized she hadn't been asked it in years. In her marriage, conversations had always centered on David, his work, his needs, his opinions on her life. Slowly, haltingly, Sarah began to remember the marketing firm she'd built from scratch, her love of photography abandoned when David decided it was juvenile, her dream of traveling to Morocco dismissed because David preferred European destinations. "I used to be brave," Sarah said, surprising herself. "I used to take risks." Dr. Carter smiled. "You're taking a risk right now. Leaving a marriage, starting over, that takes tremendous courage." Over the course of several sessions, Dr. Carter helped Sarah understand the psychological patterns that had trapped her. She explained how narcissistic partners don't typically use physical violence. Their weapons are more subtle but equally devastating. Narcissistic abuse rewires your brain. It creates trauma bonds where you become addicted to the cycle of criticism and intermittent affection. It's not weakness that kept you in the marriage, Sarah. It's brain chemistry. Dr. Carter also helped Sarah understand that healing wouldn't be linear. You'll have good days and bad days. Days when you feel strong and days when David's voice in your head tries to convince you you're making a mistake. That's normal. Recovery from this kind of psychological trauma takes time. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in March. Sarah walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than she had in 15 years. David's parting shot was predictable. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll never find anyone who loves you the way I do." Sarah almost laughed because she finally understood that what David called love was actually possession. Real love didn't require her to disappear. Real love didn't demand she become smaller to make someone else feel bigger. 6 months later, Sarah was rebuilding her marketing business, reconnecting with old friends, and slowly learning to trust her own instincts again. She started taking photography classes, planning that trip to Morocco, wearing colors David never liked. The healing wasn't easy. Some days Sarah would catch herself reaching for her phone to ask David's opinion about a client decision, then remember she didn't need his approval anymore. Some nights she'd wake up in a panic, convinced she'd made a terrible mistake. But each day got a little easier. Each decision she made independently strengthened her confidence. Each boundary she set taught her she was worthy of respect. Dr. Carter continued to see Sarah through those first difficult months of freedom. She helped Sarah recognize the red flags she'd missed with David, the early warning signs of narcissistic behavior. More importantly, she helped her develop a stronger sense of self that couldn't be erased by someone else's needs. The goal, Dr. Carter explained, isn't to never trust anyone again. It's to trust yourself first, to maintain your own identity even within a relationship, to understand that love shouldn't require you to become someone else. Sarah's story didn't end with a new romance or a dramatic confrontation with David. It ended with something quieter but more profound. Sarah learning to love herself again. She learned to enjoy her own company, to make decisions based on her own values, to surround herself with people who celebrated rather than criticized her authentic self. She learned that leaving David wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of it. Today, Sarah runs a thriving marketing consultancy. She travels regularly, maintains close friendships, and has even started dating again, carefully, with healthy boundaries and a clear sense of her own worth. Sometimes people ask her how she stayed in that marriage for so long, how she didn't see what was happening. Sarah understands now that these questions come from a place of fear, the fear that it could happen to anyone. Because it could. Narcissistic abuse doesn't discriminate based on intelligence, education, or strength. It preys on our deepest needs for love and acceptance, using those needs against us. But Sarah also learned something else. Recovery is possible. With the right support, professional help, and a commitment to healing, survivors can reclaim their lives. They can learn to trust themselves again, to love themselves again, to believe they deserve relationships built on genuine respect and care. Dr. Carter often tells Sarah's story, anonymized of course, to other patients who find themselves in similar situations. She's found that hearing about someone else's journey from captivity to freedom can plant seeds of hope in minds that have forgotten hope is possible. The human spirit is remarkably resilient. Even after years of psychological manipulation, the authentic self remains intact, waiting to be rediscovered. Sarah's courage to leave, to heal, to rebuild, that courage exists in every survivor. Sometimes it just needs someone to help them find it again. Sarah's story is ultimately one of hope. Not the false hope of changing an abusive partner, but the real hope of changing your own life. The hope of remembering who you are beneath years of criticism and control. The hope of learning that you are worthy of love that doesn't hurt, relationships that don't diminish you, and a life that reflects your own choices rather than someone else's demands. In the end, Sarah discovered that the golden cage David had built around her was locked from the inside. All she'd ever needed was the courage to turn the key.